It's like being the young prince. You won't ever be king.
It was only until about 5 years ago that in the past 5 years they've stopped introducing me as Tim Leary's partner.
Right.
And which, I mean, I think that was great. I see him as one of my, first teachers, great teachers. And, but I don't have the fun for me. It says I have no model of myself. I mean, I don't know who I am. I don't know whether I'm an anachronism from the 60s or I'm just about to happen.
A prophet to be.
Yes, I have no idea, and I don't care. That's what I saw, because either of them, all the things you get in either way are a drag, and they're beautiful, equally.
No, well, I think you're a prophet to be. I think we all are.
We all are, yes.
As Bilbo Baggins once said, the greatest adventure still lies ahead. I believe that. I'll believe that when they lower my box.
I do too. Exactly. Good. Exactly.
Well, thanks for coming by. I'm sure you had many, many demands on you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Good.
I was afraid of you up until now. Now I'm delighted to be with you.
Don't be afraid of me. The people who are afraid of me don't know me, or they know me better than you ever will. Angela Sarian is an anthropologist and workshop leader from California who brings the unique perspective of her Basque ancestors to the formulation of a new discipline which I would call neo-shamanic anthropology. So there you have it, as the king said to Mozart.
Yes. Yes, as the caterpillar on top of the mushroom said, "Who are you?"
Well, so I looked over your newsletter. And it looks like sort of a neo-shamanism is the category that you are now defining in your public talks. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of that, but mostly universals, what we all have in common, finding those basic roots, which then take us back to indigenous cultures.
Archetypes?
Archetypes. Especially the archetype of the warrior and the healer and the teacher and the visionary. Those are the four that the shamanic or indigenous cultures really focus upon.
Well, so you're genuinely in the mainstream of the archaic revival.
Never thought about it that way, Terence.
Well, actually, I'm sort of subliminally plugging one of my books, which is called The Archaic Revival. But the notion is that what this whole cultural thrust of the 20th century, and especially the last 30 years, will ultimately be understood to be about, is a return to Aboriginal models.
Yes.
And that means especially shamanism, and to my mind, especially psychedelic shamanism.
Yes.
But the Renaissance went through a rebirth of classicism, probably without ever really articulating that that's what was happening. But I think this shamanic or Aboriginal ecological feminine partnership impulse is now pretty explicit. So that's what I meant.
Yeah. Well, I think that I love the title, like Archaic Revival, because at the same time what's coming up is everyone talking about a new world order. Right. And yet in order to understand what constitutes a new world order, we need to take a look at what the current world order is. And so we really have essentially four worlds. We have the industrialized first world, and we have the socialist bloc, which would be the second world, and we have the third world countries, which are really the developing countries like Brazil. But the fourth world is really the Aboriginal indigenous cultures that are within cultures but don't have the same kind of rights. And the first three worlds say that the land belongs to the people, but the fourth world says that the people belong to the land. And so that people belonging to the land is really it's your archaic revival, but it's getting back to nature and owning those roots brings up that revival, which is the shift that we're going to need to make in order to do the new world order, is to get the people back to the land.
Well, it's too bad that there's no place in the world where that Aboriginal position is in a governing position.
Starting for the first time in the last 3 years is the establishment of the World Indigenous Council. And this summer in July is the first time that there will actually be a vote to have a seat on the United Nations where there will be representatives from each of the world indigenous peoples. And so I'm real hopeful.
Really?
About that.
You mean every Amazonian tribe could potentially have a
Yes.
delegate in the UN?
Yes. Or that they themselves could have a council and vote who would be their best representatives as a bioregional.
Well, you know, there's some phrase in Latin, I can't remember what it is, but it means that he who does not expand his borders will have his land taken by somebody else.
Yeah.
And this was the theory that drove colonization in South America. All of these countries like Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela actually encroach on a vast Aboriginal core of that continent, which should be self-governing.
Yeah.
And were it self-governing, it would be a tremendous...
Huge force.
Huge force.
Yeah. It's amazing that I really think that for the last 20 years there's been this whole east-west bridging, but we're really starting in the last 5 years to this north-south kind of bridging, and I really feel that that the Latin American countries, which there are 12, plus the indigenous force countries, that the northern force would be Europe, Russia, Canada, but the whole southern force is like Africa, Asia, and the Latin American countries. And so that whole force and those two forces really coming
So
together.
even though you're a spiritual teacher, you talk global politics
I
like a
do.
State Department second string.
I do. Well, I was thinking about the grandparents of the planet being the old Asian cultures and all the Pacific Rim, and then the exciting thing that's happening in Europe for the first time in history, that 11 countries are coming together to form a European coalition that it puts the child of the planet, which is like America or the United States, which is so based on a hero myth or a heroine myth and fierce independence, that for the call in the next 50 years is for Americans to learn about community, which indigenous societies and the grandparents of the planet, the old Asian cultures, and now the parents of the planet, really modeling teamwork and collaboration and community, is that America is going to need to really learn about collaboration and community and cooperation. And in order to do that, then there's going to need to be going back to what would be the archaic revival, or that beginning to shift so that there can be a new world order where that fourth world is addressed.
Well, don't you think sort of what's happening is that people have a very strong local sense of place, loyalty,
true.
and then they are forming a planetary loyalty, but in a way all the levels in between are dissolving, so
Yes.
people don't think of themselves as Americans, they think of themselves as Northern Californians and Earthlings, sort of like that.
Yeah.
But in a way, federal Europe, which is no longer a sure thing, you know, because
Yes, I know.
recent developments, it goes against that.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of think maybe McLuhan was right, and that there is going to be a kind of electronic feudalization where many more small states will emerge, and there is the raison d'etre for the nation state appears to be slowly disappearing. and the states